Today, I'm delighted to welcome Jools Townsend, Chief Exec of the Community Rail Network, which is a membership body for over 70 community rail partnerships and which represents over 1,000 station adoption groups. Some amazing work is being done to empower communities and help to grow confidence in using the rail network, and I'm so pleased that Jools joined us today to tell us more about it. Jools Townsend, good morning and welcome to the Intuitive Insights podcast. It is an absolute delight to see you.
Morning, Nina. Thank you. It's good to be here.
I'm so pleased that you have been able to find the time in what I imagine, like the rest of us, is an extremely busy diary. There's a huge amount going on in Community Rail. But as Chief Exec of the Community Rail Network, I know that there are some amazing things happening in your world, and I think even more engagement, even more kind of visibility and profile for the different things that are happening. And I'm really delighted that you've joined us so that we can start to spread the word about some of these incredible things that are happening. In true time-honoured Intuitive Insights podcast fashion, though, I'm going to start with you, if I may. When I was at school, way back in the dark ages, we were given a 10-minute slot in the careers library, which essentially was the old stationery cupboard. And there was a green box which was full of cards, and the idea was that you looked through these cards to get some inspiration on what career you might want to go into. All sorts of weird and wonderful things came out of there. But I think in terms of my knowledge of the third sector, I didn't really have any, didn't even know it existed, if I'm absolutely honest. So I'm going to push the conversation across to you and say, tell me where you started and take us through your career to the role that you're currently doing today as Chief Exec of the Community Rail Network.
Well, I vaguely remember going into the careers library and talking to a careers advisor, and if I'm honest, not getting much back that was of great use. I think at that point in my life, I hadn't heard of the third sector, the community and voluntary sector either. Certainly wasn't aware of the huge array of career opportunities that it offered. But I was passionate about communities. I was passionate about sustainability, although I'm not sure I would have used that term at that point. I was really interested in communications and the media, and I think coming out of university a few years later, I found my way into the community and voluntary sector really a bit by accident. I was looking for a job and saw a fantastic role at Break, the road safety charity, which seemed to tick all my boxes in terms of enabling me to deliver communications work with the media, deliver campaigning, and hopefully make a positive difference to society. And I built my career from there really, and I've worked at an array of different charities and not-for-profits, working at different levels, a few national organisations, a few locally based and regional organisations with different focuses. But over the years, I've had a particular emphasis, accidental really to start with, but a particular emphasis on transport, working with communities to support the development of more sustainable, more inclusive, more community-friendly transport. So yes, I've kind of found myself in this particular niche, which I'm absolutely passionate about, and continually learning more and more as I go along. But
yeah, absolutely. I think we're all in that boat, aren't we? I think interesting the point you make about the word sustainability, because that's quite a new one. And relatively speaking, from our perspective in terms of the executive search market, then we obviously over time you see different types of job titles coming up. And over the last kind of, I would guess now, now probably 4 to 5 years, we have seen more senior roles, actually, which is a really good sign, where we know that the organisations are appointing group sustainability director, for example. I've seen one on LinkedIn this morning being announced at Keltbray. We've got diversity and inclusion directors. There are different types of job titles coming through, which are what we would have, I guess, going back again into the dark ages when I started work, these job titles would never have been heard of. Just wouldn't have even been thought of, never mind actually put into practice. So I find it really interesting as well that so many people that I speak to got into their roles by accident. There's there are definitely those who have planned it and they've got a very specific career plan. But the more people that I speak to, the more I realise that those people are in the minority, and the rest of us have got where we've got to because of a happy accident at some point in the past, that an opportunity presented itself and off we go. We're off and running.
Yeah, but I think it's incredibly encouraging, as you say, isn't it, that there are more and more of these roles popping up at all levels, with that really strong focus on sustainability, social inclusion, on people and doing something good in the world. And I think my understanding is it's increasingly important to people starting out on their in their careers as well. Increasingly, people are looking for roles that enable them to make that contribution to give back to society. And I think there's an increasing number of ways that you can do that. We talked about the community and voluntary sector being an often overlooked, I think, career pathway. A lot of people wrongly assume that it's just for volunteering, and there's a lot of, obviously, thousands and thousands of volunteers that make the community and voluntary sector what it is. But there are also lots and lots of organisations that employ people that have a business model and offer different career opportunities. But as you say, across different sectors, I think there's that widening recognition of how organisations in all sorts of sectors and with all sorts of different remits can make that positive contribution through their day-to-day, and through engaging with communities and thinking about those co-benefits that they can deliver for society alongside their business as usual.
You're absolutely right. I think there's lots of evidence now that tells us that the millennials, the people who are coming into and getting onto the career ladder, then the things that are important to them are quite different to what might have been important to their parents and their grandparents. And the sustainability credentials of organisations, for example, how people are treated, but also the green credentials are increasingly important. And those are the questions that are being asked by certainly by graduates who are choosing which graduate programme they want to get into. And this, for me, this kind of desire to do something good and to kind of be part of something that benefits society has been a part of the transport industry for a very long time. So people that I speak to who work in the rail industry, the big thing for the majority of them has not been about the actual trains themselves, although obviously we've got lots of engineers and we've got lots of people who came into it because that it was that part, that the kind of heavy engineering part was the attraction. I would honestly go as far as to say that I think the majority of people who came in to the rail industry and who've stayed are here because they know what they do makes a difference. We're getting people from A to B. And yes, it's the train that physically does that, but actually it's the railway industry as a whole, it's the people that make that happen. So I think that kind of making a difference thing is huge.
Yeah. And of course what we see in community rail is it's all about, community rail is inherently, it's all about helping the railways to deliver greater benefit to society, and the work that is delivered within community rail. It's all about helping people to live their lives well through utilising rail travel, local stations. So we see firsthand within community rail the enormous difference that the railways make to people's lives, and I think it's part of it's something really valuable that community rail can offer to our rail industry partners, is really showing in quite a visible, tangible way the difference that the railways make, and just reminding everyone why we're here, and making sure that people are at the forefront. I think it's really encouraging actually to see the strategic direction that the rail industry is now going in, and with rail transformation now in full swing. The general direction of travel is towards a more people, more community orientated railway, which is great to see. So those motivations that you're talking about, which really are at the heart of why hopefully most people within the rail industry are doing what they do, just making sure that that's at the forefront, and that's how the railways are communicating and positioning themselves to the wider world.
Yeah, as you say, this, as we go through, and my goodness, over the last couple of years, we've been through quite a few iterations of the contract, haven't we, between the government and the train operating companies. But my understanding is that with the national rail contracts, that there is a measure within there about social value. So in terms of that organisation running that part of the network, then there are questions around what that social value piece is, what is the engagement with the communities. And we were seeing some great stuff anyway, but I think that the fact that it is now actually, it's official, we're measuring this, it's important for the Department for Transport to know what each of its contract holders is delivering in that area. It clearly is becoming more and more of a focus point.
Absolutely, yeah. We've been working closely with RSSB and Network Rail to advise on how the rail industry can best think about and assess and evidence the social value that it delivers, and making sure that community rail is thought about in the mix there. But I'm really pleasing to see that acknowledgement of the social side of rail is coming more and more to the fore, and is being recognised in that quite official way, as you say, in the contracting. And in the William Shapps plan for rail, we were really pleased that community rail was so prominently recognised, and the contribution it makes in lots of different ways.
Yeah, I think the other measure for me personally of the change that I've seen over the past 5 years is that I've been privileged to, for the last 5 years, have been a judge for the National Rail Awards. And my panel, so we kind of each category has a panel of judges, and the panel that I am on and now chair is the Outstanding Personal Contribution Award. And what I have definitely noticed over the period of time that I've been on that panel is that we get more and more entries for people who are doing amazing stuff with communities.
Right.
So kind of, things that are happening. We had a fantastic entrant a couple of years ago who was working with the local Muslim community, looking at there was this cycle hire scheme. It was all about kind of multimodal stuff and encouraging Muslim women to use the railway. So how could we do that? Well, we'll join forces with this fabulous inspirational lady who had put together this cycle scheme for the Muslim community in her area. And it was kind of all of these things are happening out there in the network. There was another one where there was a calendar that was put together by it was a local cafe that decided they wanted to do something to help the homeless. And again, one of the frontline staff from the railway joined forces and helped to produce this calendar, which raised funds for homeless people in that community. Loads of stuff happening, loads of people doing amazing things. And you will see a lot more of this, obviously, than I know about. I'm picking up bits as I go around. Tell us more, Jools, about Community Rail Network in terms of what people are doing. You've got thousands and thousands of volunteers, haven't you? So again, as a chief exec managing that, how does that work? And how do you get people to kind of achieve what they're achieving?
So we are a network, we're a membership organisation. So I'd firstly emphasise they're not really our volunteers, although they're part of the Community Rail movement. You know, these are volunteers that are, and there are thousands out there. I think probably over 10,000 volunteers within Community Rail now, getting involved with their local stations, mostly volunteering for station friends groups at a very local level, bringing their local stations into the heart of their communities. We've got around, well over 1,000 station friends groups now around Britain, doing all sorts of different projects, depending on what's relevant and appropriate and needed within their local areas. And you know, it's a grassroots movement, so varying priorities. And on top of that, we've got 74 community rail partnerships around the country, and these are small community-based organisations, usually with 1 or 2 staff members working along a railway line, or sometimes across a number of lines or across county, to engage people with their railways, encourage good use of the railways, and to work closely with train operators and other rail industry partners to implement improvements that meet local needs. So, as I say, all sorts of different initiatives going on, from the volunteering, community gardening, arts projects at stations, bringing people together, bringing people into the station, and forming those connections with the railway. Projects to promote rail use as a form of sustainable travel, often focused on leisure and tourism, which of course is especially important now in the post-pandemic environment. Thinking about how the railway connects up with other sustainable modes of travel. So you just gave a fantastic example, it sounds like, of a bike share scheme, helping people to get to their local station in a sustainable and inclusive way. So there's a lot of that going on within Community Rail at the moment, thinking about active travel links, but also working with local bus operators, community transport providers. And then, a big focus too on social inclusion, working with different groups to help increase confidence, increase travel skills and familiarity. Working with young people is a big focus area, big development area within Community Rail, helping younger generations to be able to access new opportunities that they may have otherwise found out of reach. So an awful lot going on. We're in the build up now to Community Rail Week, which is the second time we will have run this event at the end of May, 23rd to the 29th of May, which is a big celebration of everything going on in Community Rail. But we've got a big, strong focus this year on encouraging new people, non-passengers, to give the train a try. Yeah. I think that's a lot of what Community Rail is doing. Is, you might think of it as rail outreach. It's going beyond existing passengers, thinking deeply about what's needed and wanted within local communities, and how local communities can get the best from their railways, and bringing new people on board, and of course that contributes to sustainability. It's about getting more people getting around via green green travel, but also, as I say, working with groups that otherwise might have limited mobility, limited access to opportunity.
Yeah. There was another great story. I've got had another person who was nominated for a National Rail Award who gave an example of how she worked within the community at her station. And she was a customer service ambassador, but she took it upon herself. There was a lady who was coming into the station in a wheelchair, and she was saying that she really didn't feel confident about travelling. She knew she needed to kind of embrace it and gain confidence, but she didn't know how to do that. So this member of staff took her onto the rail network with her children. So her children came with her as well. So it was a family affair, and they travelled various kind of routes around the local network to build that confidence up. And that same lady had like the ladies' theatre group, who were all kind of wanting to use the railway, but again were in this case ladies of a certain age. They weren't used to using the transport network. They knew they wanted to. They knew that there was opportunities to get to different places, but there was a confidence thing, like you referred to. And having that support to do something, to get on the train, to work out which platform you're going from, when to get off, how do you know when it's your stop next, all that stuff that so many of us take for granted because we do it a lot, actually doesn't come naturally to everybody.
Yeah, well, and I would say that lack of confidence, lack of familiarity with the railways is a major barrier in getting more people using the trains, thinking about modal shift, thinking about decarbonising transport and shifting as many journeys as we can onto public transport and active travel, but also thinking about creating a more inclusive transport network and enabling people who may otherwise have limited mobility to access opportunities and get to where they want to. And I think it's often overlooked, and I think if you're within the rail industry, it's easy to forget that a huge number of people out there who never use the trains.
Absolutely.
And for whom actually it can be quite a daunting experience. Certainly talking to some of our members, I know I've just been exchanging some emails with Community Rail Lancashire. They're a very well established community rail partnership. They do a lot of work with schools and colleges and young people. And they have a rail confidence programme, which is does what it says on the tin. It's building those skills, that awareness, the familiarity, but in a very empowering way. And enabling the young people they work with to really shape their experience and get involved in community rail in ways that suit them. But they will tell you that that they go into a classroom with a group of teenagers, and the majority of them either won't have been on a train that they can remember or ever. And a lot of them will find it quite a daunting, scary prospect. So just getting young people onto a train for the first time is actually, can be quite a breakthrough. Another one of our members, Kent CRP, they do a lot of work with young people as well, and they work very closely with the college on the Isle of Sheppey. Getting the young people involved in station improvement projects and awareness raising about the railway, as well as building that familiarity and the travel skills. A lot of the young people they work with have never been off the Isle of Sheppey. So I mean, it's literally broadening their horizons and enabling them to think, actually I can go further afield, I can access work and training opportunities, I can travel independently to see friends and family. It's quite transformative, actually. Some of these stories and examples that we've got of community rail working with young people, it really does I think show what we need to do to break down these barriers and unleash these greater benefits of local railways.
So we are, as we've said, we are seeing some kind of Shining examples, loads of shining examples of what's being done in the network. We've got some evidence that the government is taking it seriously because social value is included in the new contracts for the train operating companies. So not only is it a nice thing to do and a good thing to do and a right thing to do, it's actually being measured. So we know how important it is. So things are changing and we're seeing some really positive moves in the right direction. But this is the part of our conversation where I turn into the fairy godmother and get my magic wand out and say, Jools, if I can give you 3 wishes for what you want to see in the future, for some, for more evidence of change and transformation that you feel would really kind of support the work that you, your team, and the volunteers within Community Rail do. What would you like? What would those 3 wishes be?
I think firstly, I'm not sure it's a complete U-turn, but a further progress along the lines of really recognising that community involvement and putting the communities at the forefront of what happens within rail and the transport sector generally. Is absolutely fundamental. It's not fluffy stuff. It's not a nice to have add-on. Actually, when we're involving communities and really in an empowering way and listening to communities and treating communities as partners in rail and transport development, it unleashes all sorts of benefits for those communities, and it's incredibly helpful and beneficial, of course, for the transport operators, bringing new people in. So we've got that evidence that Community Rail contributes in no small part to high levels of rail patronage. So lines with Community Rail partnerships see higher levels of patronage than lines without. Yeah. And all sorts of benefits in terms of improving transport assets, transforming stations, bringing some quite unloved and underutilized stations to life. So there's all sorts of ways that community involvement can be used to greater effect within the transport sector. But I think it needs to be conceived in that way of, as I say, thinking about working with collaboratively in partnership with communities. It's got to be driven from the grassroots up. It's about facilitating local action and listening and respecting communities rather than a top-down approach. I think that's only the first one on the list, isn't it?
And I completely get where you're coming from. I think we're pointing in the right direction, and we've started taking some steps.
Yeah.
And we're seeing, and we've got the evidence. And I absolutely love what you've said, and I'm going to quote you on it, that it's not fluffy stuff. This isn't just like, some retired people standing at a station and, planting a few bulbs. This makes a fundamental difference to people's experience of the railway. And as you said, the evidence is there. If you've got community rail partnership on your line, then that has a heavier patronage. More people are travelling.
Yeah.
Can't argue with those figures. They are what they are. So really good point. We need to. We're getting there, but there's still quite a lot more that we can be doing.
I have got 2 more. So my second point was around holistic thinking about transport, trying to break down those silos. So I think, if we are to move towards a more sustainable, more inclusive transport future, we've got to be thinking about the whole system. Okay. We've got to be thinking about the railways working in synergy with buses and community transport and shared mobility schemes and walking and cycling. So I think that would be my second wish. And I think if we can, I think some good headway has been made actually in recent years and through the pandemic in terms of a more collaborative approach within the rail industry, and I think that's been acknowledged through the Williams review. There's a need for that more joined up approach within rail, but I'd really love to see that joined up approach extending beyond rail.
Yeah.
And I think particularly some really important ripe opportunities for the rail sector and the bus sector to be working together, and I think we've got to do that if we're to see that shift, that modal shift away from such heavy dependency on the private car.
So obviously, Jools, you're chief exec of the Community Rail Network, and we've got the Community Rail Partnerships. Is there an equivalent in the bus industry?
No. And we have had a few really positive conversations with transport owning groups who are also bus operators about whether there is scope to take some of the lessons and the insights from community rail and share that more widely. So we're very happy to, if there's anyone listening to this that would like to have that conversation, really, really happy to to share the community rail insights more widely. But as a reference, I think although community rail is absolutely focused on, committed to working with our rail industry partners and getting that value from the rail network, we do very much acknowledge that the railways don't work in isolation. And part of getting that additional social value and environmental value from our rail network is about improving those connections with other sustainable modes. So
that's interesting. Yes, there's definitely a big wish to be granted there, isn't there? How do we get that all?
Yeah, and
holistic thinking around. Yeah,
and we certainly, Community Rail Network works closely with others within the community and voluntary sector who are involved in other aspects of sustainable transport. So we're part of the Sustainable Transport Alliance, which also includes bus users, Sustrans, Living Streets, Como UK, Campaign for Better Transport. So we're working with these other organisations that are supporting communities on other aspects of sustainable transport to try to help that more holistic approach.
Right. Interesting. Gosh, that's got all sorts of things whizzing off in my head. So what's number 3?
So my third wish has gone completely from my head as I've been talking about that more holistic. Oh yes, I was gonna lead on to it quite naturally at one point, and it does time with what I was just talking about on working together across the sustainable transport field. It's just I think a bit more honesty. And being a bit braver about the message around the changes that we need to see to move towards more sustainable transport, a more sustainable transport system, more sustainable transport behaviours. As we're recording this podcast, we've just had the IPCC report come out with further stark warnings about the pressing nature of the climate emergency, specifically recognising the dramatic changes that we need within transport if we're to bend the emissions curve. Right. And I think that there's increasing evidence that if we're to do that, we need to not only move very swiftly, but we need to dramatically reduce private car use. We need to do that within the current decade. And we're starting to see devolved governments and local authorities within the UK putting in place targets for reducing private car use and shifting journeys onto public transport. But time is running short. We've got a lot to do to decarbonise transport in a short space of time. I think it's encouraging to see increasingly, I think the rail industry is recognising that the biggest part that the railways can play in transport decarbonisation is supporting modal shift, getting more people using the railways instead of driving. But I think generally we need to start talking about this. We need to start getting that out there, and I think it's it's a massive challenge that we face, but it's also an exciting opportunity, because in changing transport in this way, in moving towards a greener, more climate safe transport future, we can also unlock all sorts of benefits for people on a day-to-day basis at a community level. So I think, lots and lots of opportunity there for working with communities to make this happen, to achieve this transition that we now urgently need.
Yeah, it does feel like certainly the contrast between this time 2 years ago when we were in lockdown, and so where I live, kind of I can walk in 2 or 3 miles in different directions, and there are 3 different motorways. And so this time last year, when I was out on my 1 hour of exercise a day, then I would go over one or other of these bridges, and there was kind of, some days there was no cars. There were no cars on the motorways. It was so quiet. All you could hear were the birds singing. And what I've noticed significantly in the last few weeks is the massive increase in the number of in the number of cars, the amount of traffic noise that we can hear. But also, if I've been out on the roads myself, we're back into that kind of we're all sat in a traffic jam. I remember going into Manchester. Actually, I very, very rarely drive into Manchester. I generally drive to a train station and go on the train from there, I should hasten to add. But I remember driving into Manchester and seeing one of the information boards that had been put up, that it was along the lines of, you're not in traffic, you're not in a traffic jam, you are the traffic jam.
Yeah,
that was like, oh my goodness, yeah, you're absolutely
right. Great, they put that on board.
There, kind of moaning
honesty, yeah. But no, yeah, I think that's exactly the kind of upfront message we need. But I think you're right that during the pandemic we had a glimpse of how lovely our communities can be when they're so much quieter, less polluted, less clogged up with traffic. And although, of course, the pandemic has created great challenges within the railways and public transport generally, obviously hit patronage very hard. Although some positive signs that numbers are now bouncing back. But the pandemic is a great moment of change, and there are all sorts of ways that, of course, that society has been affected, but that moment of change also provides a great opportunity for moving things in a different direction.
It does. So in terms of so kind of to move our conversation, there's so many other things I want to ask you about, but we know that these podcasts, the best practice for a podcast is 30 to 40 minutes. So I'm going to kind of bring our conversation to the final part, Jools, and ask you, in terms of people that have inspired you, or things that have inspired or continue to inspire you, where do you get that from? Is there a person, has there been a leader, someone in your life, or someone in kind of in the public glare that somebody that you look to for inspiration?
I was going to mention actually a previous boss that I worked for at a charity called Better Start Bradford, who was just a real breath of fresh air in terms of making you really think about people and feelings, and building that into your decision making, which I thought was quite an unusual approach, and she really made me think about how we can, as leaders, as managers, really make sure that we are grounded, and that we are always putting people and their needs at the forefront of all of the decisions that we make and what we do. So I wanted to mention her, Michaela Howe. but in terms of day-to-day inspiration, I've got so much to go at. I mean, I'm absolutely privileged to be at the helm of Community Rail Network, and with all of our members doing constantly all sorts of amazing, inspiring work. It's always really wonderful for me. Over the last 2 years, I haven't been able to get out and about as much as I'd ordinarily like, due to the pandemic, but always really inspiring to go out and visit our members and see their work and hear about what they're involved in firsthand. I just had a lovely visit down to the new River Line, which is a new fairly new community rail partnership down in Hertfordshire, and just hearing about what they're getting involved in, how they're promoting their line. And but yeah, I'm obviously very privileged to constantly have that inspiration and that great sense of pride in everything really that I'm involved in. And but it's drawn from our members, and I think it's so important is drawing that inspiration from the grassroots.
Absolutely. I think when you are out and about and you're seeing the amazing stuff that's being done and the difference that it makes, that kind of coming back to the beginning of our conversation, and people choosing careers because they want to make a difference. And there are lots of ways of doing that, but certainly kind of what the members and the volunteers are doing as through the Community Rail Network, they're making a massive difference in so many ways, not just to the individuals that travel on the railway, but in all sorts of other ways as well, as you've described, some of them environmental, some of them commercial, some of them from a society benefit, education, getting people to jobs, all of the other stuff. There's loads happening, and it's great that you are very lucky, as you say, to be able to dip in and out of these different projects that are happening, and kind of have that wealth of knowledge in terms of what's happening out there that's working, that's going really well. So my final question, and which is the time-honoured way that we bring these conversations to a close, is where I ask my guests to share a quote that has inspired, motivated, or just even made you think. So do you have a quote that you'd like to leave us with, Jools?
I do. I was dreading this question a little bit because I thought it was probably quite a cliched answer. I really like Einstein quotes. I wouldn't say I'm looking at them all the time, but I think Einstein had a particular way of talking about the importance of creativity and innovation and fresh thinking and looking at things differently. The importance of taking a step back and not just doing things the same old way, just because that's the way we've always done them. So there's a few Einstein quotes that relate to that, but the one I picked out was, "We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them."
Brilliant. Love it. Yeah, I love it.
It's a really nice prompt, isn't it?
True. Yeah. It's so true. And for some reason, there's literally in the last couple of days, then there is another kind of quite similar quote, if you like, that's come into my head. Twice I've read it, and then somebody said it to me yesterday, which is, "What got you here won't get you there." And it's the same kind of thinking, isn't it? It's kind of, we have to be able to look at things differently, look at things creatively, and just because this is the way we've always done it doesn't necessarily mean that this has to be the way for the future. And also, just because we tried it 10 years ago and it didn't work then doesn't mean that we can't try it again now, because things might have changed. And
I think bringing people together socially, in a supportive way, facilitating interaction between different types of people is absolutely fundamental to that, looking at things differently. We often think of innovation as being about technology, but it's really all about people and different perspectives.
Absolutely. Yeah, just getting people together and having that kind of blue sky thinking, chuck some ideas out, let's see where it takes us. And now we're all able to get back to the office, then hopefully we can be doing more of that. Jools, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. I'm really grateful to you for joining us on the Intuitive Insights podcast. I've loved our conversation. Loads of stuff that I didn't already know, so I've learned something, which is my favourite thing to do. And I've really enjoyed your company. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Nina. It's been a pleasure.
My huge thanks to Jools for joining me today and for highlighting some of the many benefits that community rail partnerships bring to the UK railway.